When an empath steps away from a relationship with a narcissist, the very first thing they do is not look for noise or jump into new interactions. The first thing they do is vanish a little. They become quiet. They pull back. They stay indoors more often, sometimes barely wanting to step beyond their own doorway. On the outside, it may look like exhaustion or unusual calmness. But beneath that quiet surface, a mental, emotional, and spiritual shift is taking place. No empath who has loved a narcissist can walk back into life immediately with a heart still whole. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the emotional drain, and the long cycles of psychological chaos push the empath system far beyond what they ever imagined they could survive. And when that storm finally ends, their soul begins an ancient inner process Jung referred to as retreating into the self, a return to the innermost core to restore the energy that was taken. In this stage, they choose silence, not because they fear the world, but because for the first time in a very long while, they can hear their own voice again. The narcissist had filled their entire inner space. Their emotions were shaped by the narcissist's reactions. Their boundaries were twisted, their intuition muted, their compassion drained until almost nothing remained. So when the empath finally breaks free, they go home, close the door, not to hide from life, but to reconnect with their soul, with truth, and with the place inside where they lost parts of themselves. Silence becomes a healing medicine. Solitude becomes the doorway back into the inner world they were forced to abandon. This is not a weak escape, it is a return, a deep healing, the first step of an awakening. Because after loving a narcissist, the empath must rebuild themselves, not from the broken pieces, but from truth. And truth speaks only in silence. Part 1 begins when the nervous system collapses and the empath is forced to withdraw. Modern psychology explains that when someone lives too long in a toxic environment filled with gaslighting, emotional pressure, devaluing behavior, and ongoing micro-traumas, their nervous system enters a state called protective shutdown. Dr. Stephen Porges, known for polyvagal theory, describes it as a biological reaction where the brain pulls its energy inward just to keep the person alive. The nervous system cannot handle constant alertness anymore, so it shuts down like a lamp flickering after too many days of being forced to stay lit. Empaths, with their naturally sensitive and deeply tuned nervous systems as studied by Dr. Judith Orloff and Elaine Aron, activate this state even faster. They feel more intensely, empathize more strongly, retain emotional memories longer, and absorb energy faster than most people. For this reason, after a narcissistic relationship, even the smallest external stimulus, a tone, a phrase, a sudden sound, a familiar look, can trigger old pain. At home, they don't have to watch anyone's body language, monitor emotional weather, or guess whether today they will be treated with love or punishment. Their home becomes a safe zone where the body can finally drop its armor, relax, and release the long-held breath. But that is just the surface. Underneath that biological response is the movement of the soul, what Jung called sacred regression, a pulling of energy inward so the soul can speak again. In a relationship with a narcissist, the empath gives away the best parts of themselves: kindness, patience, healing energy, depth, and emotional wisdom, qualities the narcissist does not have. They do not just love, they shine their light onto a spirit that survives only in darkness. Silence and staying home mark the moment the soul begins gathering back that light. This reclaiming process is not gentle. It feels like pulling a cord out of a parasitic source that had attached itself for far too long. The body feels drained, the inner world shakes, and the dark projections the narcissist placed on them, guilt, uselessness, being too emotional, rise to the surface to be finally given back. And in that stillness, something powerful happens. The empath begins to recognize how many pieces of themselves they had lost. They rediscover forgotten memories, ignored desires, swallowed tears, and boundaries that were worn down. They see how they had been living in an emotional illusion, endlessly giving in the hope of saving someone who never intended to change. Silence breaks that illusion. Staying home is not avoidance. It is a sacred confrontation with the truth. When they stop interacting so much with the world, they are not hiding from life. They are trying to hear themselves again, the voice drowned out by the chaos of the relationship. This is where intuition wakes up. gentle but sharp, like water returning after a long drought, they start noticing patterns they never had the clarity to see before. Why they attract narcissists, why they try to rescue others, why abandonment terrifies them, why they forgive too easily. This becomes a personal dark night of the soul. For an empath, it is not a night of despair, but of cleansing. In the dark, they face the wounded inner child, restart the nervous system, and return the shadows that were never theirs. Clearing their energy, reclaiming purity worn down by emotional violence. Another reason the empath prefers staying home is because they are tired of performing. Many empaths grow up in emotionally unstable families, forced into roles like the peacekeeper, the strong one, the child who absorbs pain. Entering a relationship with a narcissist intensifies these roles. They become the emotional nurse in a circus of chaos. When they finally escape that environment, they do not want to act anymore. They do not want to smile while suffering. They do not want to explain when they did nothing wrong. They do not want to apologize for faults that never belonged to them. Staying home is their way of saying, I need to stop performing and return to being human. Inside that space, the empath feels freedom again. Not freedom from someone, but freedom to simply exist. Making tea, listening to rain, reading a page, breathing. They become rituals of returning to their true self, where they are no longer shaped by another person's demands. The deepest reason they stay home and stay silent is because the soul is gathering strength for a powerful rebirth. Jung once said that before consciousness expands, energy must pull inward. Like an arrow drawn back before release, the empath gathers their fragmented pieces to form a complete being, one the narcissist can no longer manipulate or weaken. This silence is not an ending, it is a beginning. It is the moment the soul prepares to walk back into the world with clarity, a sharper heart, and a renewed sense of worth. Part 2 begins when silence becomes the soul's language. In this phase, the empath understands a truth they never dared to touch before. Silence is not emptiness. It is intuition returning, the sacred space where the soul speaks in its own voice. After narcissistic abuse, they were trapped inside a storm of emotional noise. Unspoken arguments, gaslighting that twisted reality, expectations that forced them to change themselves to avoid conflict. The silence they enter now is the opposite of that chaos. It is where they finally hear the smallest movements within, the sigh of intuition they once ignored, the heartbeat restoring its rhythm, the soul knocking softly to bring them back to their real self. 1-0. The first things that appears in silence is clarity. Not the clarity of thinking hard, but the clarity that rises from deep inner knowing. The wisdom Jung called the unconscious intelligence. They start seeing things they couldn't recognize while inside the relationship, the words meant to manipulate, the cycles of idealization and devaluing, the moments they submitted not from love, but from fear of being abandoned. Silence becomes a light shining into the dark corners of their past. And the harsh truth is this: everything was always there. They just never had the stillness to see it. When truth surfaces in quiet, the empath experiences a shock, not because someone hurt them, but because they can finally see how much of themselves they surrendered in that emotional trap. Some call it a spiritual awakening, others an emotional detox, and some describe it as their soul returning. Whatever the name, it represents the return of awareness. This is also where the empath begins to feel their own energy again. Without someone draining them, they realize their warmth, honesty, depth, and compassion are not gifts for others to consume. They are sacred energies to offer intentionally, not through pressure or fear. This awareness reshapes their entire inner world. If they once believed love meant endless giving, now they understand that true love never demands the sacrifice of inner peace. True love starts when they love themselves enough to never repeat the same trauma. In silence, they relearn how to choose. They ask, who is truly worthy of walking beside me? Who is not? Who is safe for my heart? Who only approaches to take what they cannot create themselves? They no longer open the door to anyone who knocks. They no longer allow emotional chaos to enter their rebuilt inner home without first examining its intent. As silence deepens, so does transformation. Fear of being alone fades, emptiness disappears. They no longer feel anxious about proving their worth. Instead, they feel a fullness, a calm steadiness that needs no approval and that no narcissist can take away. Then something surprising happens. The more time they spend alone, the more connected they feel to the world, not through noise, but through intuition. They see the truth behind people's smiles. They hear insecurity hidden under bragging. They sense others' energy even before a word is spoken. This ability was always theirs, but now they use it consciously, not unconsciously pressured by trauma. Silence turns this gift into a strength. The most important truth is this: silence stops being a hiding place. It becomes the foundation on which they build a life rooted in honesty instead of illusion. When an empath reaches this point, they are no longer the person they were before. They cannot be manipulated as easily. They refuse responsibility for someone else's emotions, and they no longer fear losing anyone, because they now know that nothing external can steal what belongs to their soul. Silence becomes their declaration, a quiet power that requires no defense. And this silence is exactly what the narcissist cannot tolerate. Because when the empath becomes silent without suffering, without longing, and without reacting, the narcissist realizes the control is gone. Part 3 begins when silence turns into a ritual of rebirth, and home becomes the sacred space of the soul. After enough time away from the chaos of a narcissistic relationship, the empath begins to feel an internal shift much deeper than they understood before. Silence stops being a reaction and becomes a chosen ritual. Their home is no longer a hiding place, but a sacred inner chamber where the soul begins to reorganize itself. To outsiders, it seems simple. They stay home, speak less, withdraw. But inside them, a profound ND transformation unfolds. Energy pulls inward. The self breaks down and rebuilds. Emotional pieces return. Awareness rises from the ashes of dependency. The empath starts to understand how far their soul had been pulled away from itself. The narcissist didn't just take their time, trust, or kindness. What they took most painfully was the empath's internal compass, the ability to hear their own inner direction without someone else twisting it. So as they settle into stillness, their entire inner structure resets. Silence becomes the space where their true voice emerges again. And as they listen, healing begins. Silence also becomes a reflection. In this quiet, they witness with shocking clarity the boundaries that dissolved, the moments they were trained to serve someone else's emotions, the times they silenced their intuition to maintain a false peace. They see every illusion clearly, the half apologies, the empty promises, the affectionate gestures used as control. Truth no longer hurts, it awakens. This awakening leads them to what many empaths fear, meeting their own shadow. Jung wrote that one becomes enlightened not by imagining light, but by making darkness conscious. Sitting alone after narcissistic harm, the darkness rises not to punish, but to be recognized. It is the fear of abandonment, old wounds that never healed, memories they buried. In this solitude, truth surfaces without being pushed down. It is not collapse, it is purification. They finally have room to mend wounds that were not created by the narcissist, but were triggered by them. In this isolation, deeper parts of the self begin to bloom. The empath becomes sensitive in a healthier way. They sense what feels right, who feels safe, what boundaries are needed, and what must be left behind. Intuition, once blocked by manipulation, sharpens again. They start noticing subtle cues they once ignored, discom. Fort when a boundary is crossed, a quiet inner no, a sense of being guided by wisdom deeper than their conscious mind. They reconnect with the life force that the narcissist drained. With no one feeding off their energy, their emotions settle. Peace no longer feels far away, it becomes natural. Their feelings no longer swing wildly. They begin to learn what loving themselves truly means without drama, pressure, or fear. One of the deepest shifts happens when they feel safe in their own presence, a safety the narcissist never wanted for them, because an empath who feels whole alone is beyond a narcissist's reach. In their quiet home, they relearn the oldest lesson. Their worth never depended on external validation. It is affirmed through their choices, breath, and calm moments alone. Home becomes more than a physical place. It becomes a spiritual chamber, a ritual, a transformation. When this rebirth is complete, when their soul gathers strength again, they step back into life, not searching for someone to complete them, but simply living as themselves beyond the pull of a narcissist's toxicity. Part 4 begins when the empath learns to be with themselves. Once the soul is reborn, a moment arrives that every empath eventually reaches. The moment they realize silence is not hiding, it is returning. During their quiet time at home, avoiding the noise of the world, they believe they were retreating, but when their thoughts steady and their heart softens, they face a truth they avoided for years. They were never truly with themselves. In a narcissistic relationship, the empath is always adjusting, watching, giving, twisting themselves to avoid conflict. That is not presence. That is survival through hyper-awareness. When they finally step out of that relationship, silence becomes the first space where they no longer need to twist themselves into being lovable, acceptable, or enough. Their soul finally breathes. Jung once said that only in stillness does the unconscious reveal itself. For the empath, this is when the deeper consciousness begins to speak, not as fear, but as soft, honest truth. Their thoughts become clearer, their intuition sharper, their emotions meaningful instead of chaotic, and something unexpected happens. They start to feel comfortable with themselves. During this period of solitude, the empath relearns how to sit with themselves. They learn to face their pain without judging it. They revisit memories without breaking down. They look at themselves without shame. This is the stage of inner witnessing, when they no longer drown in emotional waves but observe themselves with awareness. That is true freedom. In a narcissistic relationship, they lived in constant reaction, anger, fear, over-apology, attempts to prove worth. But now, in silence, they discover something powerful. They can choose their responses. And when choice returns, power returns. Time alone makes them honest with themselves. They see the parts they hid to keep someone else happy. They see the exhaustion they ignored, the loneliness they denied, the dreams they let go to stay small. In this quiet space, they rebuild their soul. No more chasing. No more begging to be seen. No more shrinking to make someone stay. This is rebirth, not loud but deep. Then one day, sitting by the window, with soft light entering the room, they recognize a final truth. Stillness is no longer scary. Solitude is no longer empty. Being alone no longer aches. It becomes a sacred experience. And when the empath feels safe in their own presence, they step into a freedom the narcissist will never have. A freedom that needs no praise, no rescuer, no witness. They become the companion they once wished others would be. And this is when the soul truly awakens, when they promise never to abandon themselves again. Part 5 begins with the return to the self, when silence becomes the room where the soul is reborn. When the empath reaches the final stage after narcissistic damage, silence is no longer a shield or a temporary refuge. It becomes a sacred place where the true self rises. They no longer seek validation or struggle to be understood. They stop using their kindness to hold together relationships that died long ago. In the quiet, they see what they were never peaceful enough to see before, that they lived in side roles the narcissist assigned them, that the light they gave was never valued, that their exhaustion came not from loving incorrectly, but from abandoning themselves to keep an illusion alive. At this point, silence is not escape, it is coming home. They return to their breath, to their intuition, to their dreams that were buried under emotional chaos. And as everything calms, they hear the quiet voice inside whisper, "You belong to yourself." For the empath, this room becomes the place where they gather every fragment of energy stolen through control and manipulation. It is the moment Jung called returning to the self, finding the center of their being after walking through someone else's darkness. They learn that stillness is not empty. It is creative space. It is where new ideas come alive, where old emotions release themselves, where false beliefs dissolve. They realize they don't need external noise to feel alive. Life is already inside them. Silence becomes a mirror reflecting truth, not about the narcissist, but about themselves. That truth gives them what they lacked throughout the toxic relationship, inner freedom. As they sit alone with their breath and presence, they finally understand that happiness does not depend on who stays or leaves. Happiness is being able to face their own reflection without running. Happiness is breaking old patterns. Happiness is knowing they will never again be ruled by fear of abandonment or the need to please. The silence that once came with pain becomes their guide. It teaches them the difference between love and exploitation, between genuine connection and emotional theft, between peace and punishment. It shows them that real loneliness is not being alone. It is being surrounded by people who shrink the soul. With clarity, they rebuild life at their own pace. They rediscover joy in ordinary things: a page of a book, a windy day, a warm drink, a simple moment of rest knowing no one is draining them. This peace is something only those who lived in chaos truly understand. Silence becomes a choice, not a necessity. Then a profound change happens. The empath no longer fears the world, but they never go back to their old way of being. They become someone who values their energy deeply. They know who deserves to enter their space. They know when to open their heart and when to pull back. They understand that silence is not just protection. It is the place where their soul strengthens. This is the stage every awakened empath reaches. When stillness becomes a language, when solitude becomes a teacher, and when their quiet room becomes the doorway to a stronger, wiser version of themselves. In the end, the empath's silence and their choice to stay home are not signs of breaking down. They are proof of an inner awakening they never expected. After walking through emotional darkness, their soul enters what Jung described as the restoration of essential energy. They reclaim all the light drained from them. Their time alone becomes the most profound transformation of their life. In those peaceful days, they learn to be with themselves in a way they never were before. They stop living through fear, stop chasing approval, and stop healing people who never wanted help. They finally understand that peace is not a prize, it is their birthright. What's extraordinary is this: their silence becomes a new language, a language that needs no arguing, no explaining, no proving. When an empath stops speaking, it is not because they have nothing to say, it is because they realize not everyone deserves access to their truth. When they stay home, it is not isolation, it is returning to the roots of their being where intuition and wisdom can breathe again. From this renewed state, they see the world differently. Their eyes are no longer blurred by illusion or overgiving. They see the true essence of others, their motives, their energy, their intentions. They become sharp without turning bitter, calm without forcing anything. What narcissists never expect is this quiet rise. Because once an empath emerges from silence, they never come back as the person they were. They cannot be manipulated in the same way. They cannot be used for emotional supply. They become a soul who walked through inner darkness, touched deep pain, and rose with strength shaped by shadow. And that strength is not loud. It is clear, steady, and unbreakable, because the empath realizes silence does not just protect them, it transforms them. Staying home does not just give safety. It becomes the place where they rebuild their light, rewrite their path, and step into a new spiritual strength. When they return to the world, they no longer look for anyone to understand them. They become the one who understands themselves more than anyone else ever could. And that is the real victory. You are not disappearing. You are becoming. You are not shrinking. You are choosing. And you are not being abandoned. You are being led back to yourself. This is the awakening every empath must experience, a quiet journey powerful enough to dissolve illusions and allow their true light to appear, no longer controlled, no longer taken, but fully, eternally their own.